We have a great episode today with Steve Campbell on selecting cattle for grass efficiency, but I have to apologize. The audio is not up to par this week. I've done all I could to improve it. The episode's really good, so I didn't want to lose this information, so we're releasing it, but just know going in, audio's not as good as it should be. But it is a really good episode. Let's get started with the Fast Five, just so our listeners can get to know you. What's your name?
It's Steve Campbell.
What's your farm's name?
Sold grass-finished beef for about 20 years. I quit 5 years ago now. And it was tailor-made beef. And then my consulting is tailor-made cattle. And so I guess you would call it one of those, the tailor-made ranch or something.
There you go. And where are you located?
Southwest Idaho. I've lived in Idaho for life.
Yes.
I was born about 110 miles north of where I currently live, and up in New Meadows, a mountain valley. And then we lived over and kind of grew up in Caldwell, about 30 miles from where I live now. Then I moved back up to New Meadows after my dad died, and I'm leaving parts out here, and lived up there for about another 25 years. And then I moved down to where I currently live.
When did you start grazing animals?
Well, personally, I didn't start grazing animals till 88. I grew up, Dad had cattle trucks. I grew up hauling cattle around and greasing trucks and scooping out manure and whatever else you could possibly need to do on having cattle trucks. But boy, when I did get to the ranch, it was a totally different smell than being inside of a cattle truck.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it would be. Yeah. And did you always just graze cattle, or did you graze any other species?
Mainly cattle. When I moved back up to New Meadows, the stalker cattle running 1,000, 1,100 head that someone else owned. I was just getting paid to put pounds on. But then we kind of got into more of this regenerative thing, and we had some pigs one time. We had some sheep one time. We had chickens and turkeys, but mainly cattle. And it was stalkers until I got into the grass finishing, and then we built our own cow herd. So we were kind of doing a combination of stalkers and our own cow herd and finishers.
Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, the podcast dedicated to sharing the stories of grass-based livestock producers and exploring regenerative practices that improve the land, animals, and our lives. I'm your host, Cal Hardage, and each week we'll dive into the journeys, challenges, and successes of producers like you, learning from their experiences and inspiring each other to grow and graze better. Whether you're a seasoned grazer or just getting started, this is the place for you. Attention ranchers, ready to improve your land and boost your bottom line? Join Noble Research Institute for its March Ranch Management courses. Business of Grazing in Edmond, Oklahoma, March 4th through 6th. Learn to create detailed grazing plans, optimize profitability, and make smart infrastructure investments. Noble Grazing Essentials in Huntsville, Texas, March 25th through 27th. Discover how to assess carrying capacity, implement adaptive grazing strategies, and develop effective pasture recovery techniques. Expert facilitators with decades of ranching knowledge will guide you through practical field and classroom training. Receive exclusive benefits, include virtual meetings and one-on-one consultations. Space is limited. Visit noble.org to enroll and invest in your land, livestock, and legacy. So why did you decide to go towards grass finish?
Oh, that's a great question. I broke my leg really bad in the end of January 1999. Up until then, I was just a busy individual getting things done. Well, 6.5 months in an external fixator, that thing with the rings around your leg and the wires going through from different angles. Yes. And they're like, you're going to have to get a desk job. You won't be able to walk around. And I'm, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Well, I've been getting the Stockman Grass Farmer since 1989. And I was reading these articles. I was reading these articles about grass finishing. It was in the mid 90s. It was starting to kind of be a thing. And like, well, I have grass and I've kind of gotten good at growing grass and putting pounds on somebody else's cattle. Maybe this would be an opening. And so once I got that external fixator off that next winter, we kind of decided, hey, we're going to do this. And we got into buying our own larger stockers and finishing them on a summer's grass there in New Meadows. And that evolved into something else over time. But I thought, well, if I'm going to not be able to walk around much, I don't want to be doing it for somebody else. I want to be doing it for myself. Moved up to New Meadows, and Uncle Darrell, Dad's brother, Dad was dead by then, is like, control your water, better grass if you don't over or under irrigate things. And, I worked really hard at that. Well, then I'd run into these different diseases. Uncle Darrell, how do I fix this? And then over the winter, it's like, how do I not have pink eye next summer? How do I not have foot rot next summer? What's missing in the grass, in the mineral? So I've always been this preventive maintenance fellow with the trucks. Well, prevent disease in the cattle. So I was learning how to do that on somebody else's dime, so that when I got my own, I had very little of that problem, didn't need to use antibiotics, which was a big deal. And the more you get into that, your circle expands, and then you realize, well, now there's a whole lot more that I don't know. And the circle, now there's even more that I don't know. But, you're touching other people and other ideas, the more you know. And boy, I was a vacuum for information.
You mentioned there when you started grass finishing, you were doing custom grazing, and you had gotten to where you could grow grass really good. What got you to that point that you could grow grass really good?
Well, this is going to sound a little crazy, but if you'd been at the conference I was at yesterday in Ontario, Oregon, it would have fit right in. I read a book in 1980 called The Goal, Excellence in Manufacturing. 1980?
Oh,
yeah. Okay. And I was hauling cattle. I wasn't manufacturing, but in everything you do, there is a bottleneck. There's something that it slows the process. And long story short, to graze good grass, well, was it warm enough? Was the ground wet enough? Was the ground too wet? Was it too hot? Did you have enough biology? Did you have enough minerals? Well, we had a very short, sweet growing season there in New Meadows. And I just spent hours and days trying to get the irrigation right. A friend of mine said, your method of irrigation is every blade gets a drink of grass, but it doesn't get a gallon drink of water, doesn't get a gallon of water. And my uncle, after about 5 years, he's like, I can't believe you got rid of that slough grass that fast, but it was controlling the water. Yeah. Well, when that ground becomes aerobic instead of anaerobic, because it's over irrigated all the time, then that nutrition that was in the soil was able to come up in the plants. And so that the average daily gain was going up. The total pounds for the year was going up. Learned how to rotational graze. There's some stories around that. But yeah, I was a student of everything that there was to try to learn how to do there on, about 1,200, mostly owned, a little bit of leased ground, acres.
Oh, yes. And with that, you mentioned rotational grazing. When did you introduce rotational grazing into the mix?
Well, Dad had bought some old electric fencing, the string, from New Zealand.
Oh,
fencers
yes.
back before I ever showed up. But in the spring of 1989, I'd moved back up in the spring of 88. In the spring of 89, a fellow came, about 30, 40 miles away and gave a talk. And he recommended getting a subscription to the Stockman Grass Farmer. So 98, 108, 18. I've been a subscriber now for 36 years.
Yeah.
Anyway, read more and more in there, Jim Garish and some other different ideas. I've got a slide about the different kinds of rotational grazing, if you will, out there. But where I learned the very most, I was trying different things, but one time I had, I'm getting kind of deep here into the story, but I had 400 and some odd steers together, and I was trying to use them to control a particular weed. I was like, I'm not using any more chemical. So when I go into a 40-acre pasture, I would make paddocks that were 1,320 feet long and 132 feet wide. So if you were to set both of your elbows on the table in front of you, your fingers are the height of all the plants. If you move your right elbow off and now just the fingers of your right hand are sticking up above the table, that represents the grass that got eaten. And your left hand, forearm and fingers, there's what did not get eaten. The important fact of those two different elevations is the short one is now going, wait a minute, they're telling the biology, we need that stuff we were getting 40, 60, 80 days ago. We got to start over. And the tall one's going, I'm just going to need a little manganese here pretty quick. So you've got this war going on underground, the biology pulling in different directions. Well, it was 25 years later, Edwin Blosser, Midwest Biosystems, he was telling me about how the plants told the biology what to do, and he wanted you to graze and clip. And so then I told him, told him about what I was doing. They either grazed or they trampled it. So all the plants got the same insult. So all the plants are telling the biology, wait a minute, we need that stuff from before. Well, I told him a story. I'm sure they do this every year, but one year in Canada, oxen sled pulling contest, the winning oxen drug not quite 8,000 pounds on a sled. Number two was just a little over 7, and then on down from there. Well, after the ribbon ceremony, they said, I wonder what they could pull if we hitched them together. You add up what they did individually, it was right at 15,000 pounds. But when you hitched them together, pulling in unison, they pulled 26,000 pounds. Well, it was crazy, the amount of quality that came back in the regrowth that year, when I came back to it. And well, I'll just leave that there. There's more to the story, but that every plant getting an insult is a big deal.
Oh, yeah. Makes a big difference.
Yes.
We had started a little bit earlier with your grass finish. We've kind of jumped backwards again. Let's jump back to that grass finishing, and you had kept some stockers or got some own stockers. When did you get in the cattle and calf rearing business?
Well, we started in the spring of 2001 with grass finishing. So I got injured in 99, and so it'll be out the spring of 99. 2 years later, we're going to finish some animals. Well, at the end of March 2004, I went down to Sacramento to a SGF, Stockman Grass Farmer conference, where Gerald Fry was going to talk for an hour and a half about how to visually identify tender, flavorful beef on the hoof. Subsequently, after Gerald died, I actually went to Australia and took the 5-day school, classic livestock management. But boy, was that an eye opener. And later that summer, a guy I used to haul cattle for had hired Gerald to go up to Quincy, Washington. And I kind of nosed my way in, said, can I pay my share and come and listen? And after that, it's like, hey, we need to own our own cows if we want to have high quality animals to finish. You could go cherry pick if people would let you pick 3 head out of 100. I did that. Was it there in New Meadows? I did that for, I guess, 2001, 11. I did that for 10 years. And I was really picky at picking out of these 1,000 stalkers that would come up. I would get 8 to 12 head out of there. Every year I was getting approximately 1% out of that deal. The guy would sell them to me, and then we finished those. But I probably 3% of the kind of cattle that he sought to sip were the right type for finishing on grass. I was so picky. I only took 1%. Well, then I got into Red Devon and Red Angus and learned some things about shape and whatnot that gave you a more efficient animal on grass, and always was looking for the quality that came with fine bones, vertical folds in the hide, butterfat indicators, but there was a volume, a meat to bone ratio thing to look at as well.
So you were keeping those. When did you start getting your own cows?
So that would have been the spring of 2005.
And what did you mentioned Red Devon and Red Angus. What did you go look for? I'm sure you're looking for a certain type, but did you also go for a certain breed at that point?
Mainly Red Angus. A friend of mine that I had known for 20 years lived 60 miles south, and I'd go down there and he let me pick some replacement heifers. The neighbor just next door, he let me pick some from him. And anyway, then bred those 2 Red Devon, and the meat quality was great. We were having a hard time with fertility and udders and things like that, and so kind of gave up on the Red Devons. 10 years later, and really just Red Angus. Red Angus was the predominant thing that I was going for at that point. So I had some half Devon, quarter Devon, and kind of worked my way through those. But yeah, started having my own cows in 2005. And I was in 2018, I was doing 3 things. I'd learned how to raise them and grow grass. And Gerald got me into consulting there in the late aughts, if you will, like 2008.
Oh, yes.
And anyway, by 2018, I was consulting. I was selling vinegar for Golden Valley Vinegar, and I was raising grass finished beef, and I knew I couldn't do all 3. And so I made a plan at the beginning of 2018 to be out of cattle at home by the end of 2020. And it was very easy to sell all the meat I had in 2020.
Oh, yeah.
But currently I have interest in some really old Red Angus genetics with a younger man back in Ohio. The bull that we're using, ampules of semen on this bull. He was born in 1959. His great granddad was the very first bull born in the Red Angus breed. So we're trying to recreate those really good grass genetics and bring those forward.
That's very interesting.
So we have ampules on 3 kind of, 2 that are 3/4 brothers and another one that's a half a brother to those other 2.
Yes.
And that's in ampules. And then after that, it became straws.
Right.
So we're very judicious with those ampules.
I imagine so.
But kind of back to your cow question, I never wanted to own cows to just sell calves into the normal system. I wanted conception to consumption. I was trying to make the the best piece of meat I possibly could for my customer. And the more I could control everything genetically and epigenetically.
Yeah.
Epigenetics, the air, the water, the grass, the mineral, stockmanship, all of those things. The more you get those right, the better the genetics work, the better the genetics, the better they can deal with all of those other problems.
One thing you mentioned there about Red Devon and Red Angus, and you went with Red Devon for a while, mainly towards Red Angus. And we're also, as we talk about cows that excel and making sure you have the right genetics and epigenetics, how important is that breed component of it?
You can find good cattle for grass, all grass, in any breed, okay? You're going to find more of those in the British breeds than in the continental breeds. The breeds that haven't been messed with as much, typically you have more consistency there in the meat.
Oh, yeah.
And in the bell curve of the shape of the animals. Sex hormones shut off long bone growth. So the taller an animal in any breed in general, the less fertile. Now, everything else being equal, that you could have a taller animal that's more fertile than a shorter animal if everything else was wrong with the shorter animal. And,
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but in general, the shorter, down to a point, the more fertile they are. Now, I got to back away from that a little bit. The closer you are to the equator, the shorter in height, the lower in weight, and the more of an oval there is up front, the less distance between those front legs because they have to dissipate heat and humidity. The further north you go, the taller they are, the more they weigh, and the more of an O up front. They've got to retain heat in the winter time. So there is a shape, I call it the solo cup. You take that cup and turn it on its side, and on the cow, the little end of the cup is the cow's head end. On the bull, the big end of the cup is the bull's head end. And they're the opposites. When I was a kid, somebody said, well, it's like two triangles back to back. Well, I didn't get the visual. But you think about taking two of those solo cups and one facing one way and one the other. One's the bull, bigger on the front end. One's the cow, smaller on the front end.
And that's a great segue into our overgrazing discussion today of, efficient cattle for grass or selecting the more efficient type for grass. At Redmond, we know that you thrive when your animals do. That's why it's essential to fill the gaps in your herd's nutrition with the minerals that they need. Made by nature, our ancient mineral salt and conditioner clay are the catalyst in optimizing the nutrients your animals get from their forage. Unaltered and unrefined, our minerals have the natural balance and proportion that your animals prefer. This gives your herd the ability to naturally regulate their mineral consumption as they graze. Our minerals won't just help you improve the health of your animals, but will also help you naturally build soil fertility so you can grow more nutrient-dense pasture year after year. Nourish your animals, your soil, and your life with Redmond. Learn more at redmondagriculture.com. So I think the solo cup's a great visual to be able to visualize that.
Ken Redmond was in charge of crunching the numbers on, 50, 60, 70,000 head they linear measured there over the course of probably 25 years, he and some other folks. And for his master's thesis, he went back to school after he quit doing that. He took 9,500 head, all one breed, happened to be Simmental, anywhere from Mexico to Canada, everywhere in between. 3 commonalities with cows that had had 10 or 11 calves in a row without skipping. They had a bigger belly than the herd average.
Oh,
Steve Campbell says they could eat and digest enough for 3 in a dry year after they lost their teeth. They had a wider butt than the herd average. Well, that's calving ease and fleshing ability. You think about standing behind a cow or a heifer and looking at her. You want her to be 40% as wide as she is tall to have calving ease. If they're too narrow, you're going to be pulling calves. But the one trait that became the most important to get the 9th, 10th, 11th calf in a row out without skipping was slope from hooks down to pins. And boy, did it just crank up. And I called Ken and asked him why he felt that was so important. And he gave me all the usual suspects except what I was thinking. One, as that pelvis flattens out, the grow bone, I now call that the anti-fertility bone, sticks up. Typically, the vulva is sloping further forward. And if she doesn't have a big gut, not digesting well, and it's really green or whatever, and there's some manure back there on the vulva, if the bull shows up, he takes in foreign material, the pelvic floor is sloping into the cow. And so that drains into the cow. And she gets cystic ovaries, doesn't breed back. But if you have plenty of slope, for one, the vulva is vertical, so there's probably not something on it. But even if he did take something in, the pelvic floor is sloping out of the cow. She doesn't get cystic ovaries, and she breeds back for that 9th, 10th, 11th calf in a row.
As we look at cattle, I see a lot more cattle with a higher tail head placement and not slope back there. At least initially, I don't see too much slope there in a lot of cows that's being bred now.
90+% of the herds that I get asked to come and go through and help them out, that is their biggest problem. It's that that people, I call it, it's the tail process. Gerald called it the grow bone. Well, when I first heard it, it's like, oh yeah, growth, we need some of that. I now call it the anti-fertility bone. If you've chosen growth, if you've got that grow bone sticking up back there behind the hooks, you've chosen a cow that's less fertile. Well, Gene Meitler, another one of these, Michael McDonald, another one of these linear measurement guys. If you're just selling calves off of the ranch, 40% of the profit is fertility, a cow having a calf every year. 30% is what's it cost to run the cow. 20%'s growth. 40%'s fertility. 20%'s growth. We got this cedar talk. 10% carcass traits. Well, 70% of the profit is choosing a cow that's fertile and doesn't cost a lot to run. 30%'s what industry wants.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess a story about that big belly. Anibal Pordomingo, who writes in the Stockman Grass Farmer, got his PhD from New Mexico State in 1995. And at that time, the average beef cow in the U.S. digested 55% of what she ingested. Well, then he heard Gerald talk, got his dad out. There are some that digest 70% and some only 40%.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, one time I was in a guy's place. He kind of had a hodgepodge of cows that he put together for grass finishing. And I was there in the spring. He still had a bale feeder. It was real muddy. And I go, well, these are your best cows, and these will work till you couldn't replace them. But these 3 over here, they were that reverse wedge. They were walking uphill with no guts. They kind of looked like a real puny bull rather than walking downhill. Sex hormones shut off, long bone growth, estrogen in the front end of the female. So on the top, that solo cup sloping towards the cow's head means she's producing more estrogen. But on the bottom, that she's getting deeper as she goes back. Well, these these Herefords had no guts and they were walking uphill. And I told the guy, I said, best thing you can do is take those to the sale on Monday, just get rid of them. You'll never make any money. So Saturday morning, he takes me to the airport and get to the first stop, turn my phone back on. Here's a message from him. He said, I've been thinking about those 3 that you didn't like. He said, all the others, they'll eat for a couple hours, get a drink, eat a little more, go lay down and chew their cuds. Those 3 you didn't like, they get up in the morning and they just stand at that round bale feeder and they eat all day long. They're going to town. So the ones with the biggest bellies actually don't eat as big of a percentage of what they weigh. I guess the best story about that is 18 years later, Don Faulkner, a PhD from Arizona State, said, we're getting really good at predicting percent of body weight that a group of dry cows would eat. But we can't tell you what would eat depending on what we fed them. But what we can't tell you is what individual animals in that group are eating. Some are eating twice as much as others. Well, if they were averaging 3% of body weight, some were eating 4% of body weight and some only 2. Well, the one with the great big belly that weighs 1,300 pounds eating 2%, she ate 26 pounds today. The 1,000-pounder with no guts ate 40 pounds today. It's not just about weight. It's a shape. And of course, the more butterfat indicators they have, the easier keeping the cows are.
So you talked a little bit there about the shape. What are the butterfat indicators?
Well, first and foremost, the bald udder. I mean, if she's already producing milk, less hair. There's going to be more hair on what's considered a bald udder in Bismarck, North Dakota, than on the Mexican border. Okay.
Oh, yes.
But the ones with the least amount of hair in your environment, in general, they're producing more butterfat. A real close second is the number of vertical hides, which are an indicator of how loose the hide is. And you see them, if you see them in the neck area, that's good. But the further back the ribs they go, but the ones you really want, heifer or cow, are the ones that have a lot of vertical folds from the vulva down to the udder. Though you don't find a lot of those, but boy, if you find them, you want to own them.
Interesting.
There's a book that was written in the mid-1800s by Francois Guignon from France. And in 1848, I'm going to paraphrase slightly, but the French government said, if a person would follow the treaties as laid down by Monsieur Guignon, there need be no doubt as to whether a cow was a good milker. And a person could tell with certainty whether a heifer was going to be a good milker so that you would not get taken in the purchase of that animal. That doesn't sound like expected progeny difference. There need be no doubt. Tell with certainty. And the government of France said, we will pay your expenses for the rest of your life. You go tell as many people on the dairies in the countryside about this program. You can get that book reprinted today. MILCH cow, Francois Guenon. And there's a lot of drawings in there. It's worth owning.
Oh, yes.
Especially if you're a dairy person.
I will have to look that up. I don't have any dairy cows now. Of course, I threaten my wife with buying 1 or 2 every once in a while, and then I come to my senses and know I don't have that much time.
Okay.
When we think about producer out here, they're going to bring in bulls. So what should they be looking for in their bulls they're bringing in?
Michael Davis from Northeast New Mexico. Fine gentleman, very knowledgeable, a good teacher, as it turns out. One time he asked me, he says, if I wanted you to buy a bull for me, what would you buy? So I started asking him a bunch of questions, and he goes, no, I'm not going to ask that. You can look at my cows. And I thought for a while, and finally I said, well, I'd figure out what the biggest problem was in your herd, Liebig's principle, the short stay. What is holding you back? I mean, is it fertility? Is it easy keeping? What is it? And then I would buy a bull that would fix that problem first. Well, virtually everything about a bull and a cow are the opposites shape-wise, except for slope from hooks down to pins. If you've got the grow bones sticking up in your cow herd, you need an exaggerated, and you almost can't get it too much. You need a lot of slope from hooks down to pins in the bull. And 90% of the cow herds that I get in these days, that is what they need. And if the hooks on the bull are not level with the backbone, if they're down an inch or two, you just lost an inch or two of slope. You want the hooks level with the backbone so that every time he takes a step, you see one hook bone rotating up above the backbone, and then the other, and then the other. And similarly up front, when he walks, you want to see a shoulder blade rotate up above the backbone and down and up above and down. That front and rear, you want the shoulder blades going up above when they walk. On the rear, you want to see those hook bones rocking up above the backbone, or you won't get enough to change your herd. Your offspring are going to be halfway between your bull and your cow. It's probably going to take a couple of generations for most herds to get a more fertile, easier keeping cow than you've currently got.
Well, I like hearing that because one of the recent bulls we brought in, I think we don't have enough slope on our cows, and I bought a bull that's got a lot of slope. So that makes me feel good about that decision.
Good.
Because I was trying to get that slope back where we wanted it.
In the trying to get that 40% of rump width on a cow, she's 40% as wide as she is tall for calving ability. You don't necessarily want a bull that's wide back there. You want a bull with really wide shoulders. One time I called Gerald Fry and I said, boy, I've got this bull that he's really got a set of shoulders, but he just doesn't have much rump on him. And Gerald, that fashion, just like that, he goes, I think every defensive player in the NFL knew how big Jim Brown's shoulders were, but I doubt there's one of them could have told you what size pants he wore. So if you want wide rump on a cow, you need wide shoulders on a bull. And you need wide shoulders on a bull for calving ease. What? For each inch. Now, this is Michael McDonald. At a year of age, for each inch of the bull's shoulders are wider than the length of the rump, it's 2.5 days less gestation. I'm going to say that all again.
Say that again.
At 1 year of age, for each inch the bull's shoulders are wider than the length of the bull's rump. It's 2.5 days less gestation. So if you can find a bull at a year of age that's plus 2 or 3, he gets the calf out 10 to 15 pounds lighter because the calf came out 5 to 7.5 days early.
Came out.
Now that is calving ease rather than buying a sissy bull.
That is, yeah.
So there's a fellow north of Douglas, Wyoming, Frank Ethorn, had a bull named Pawpaw. And when that bull was 6.25 years old, his crest was bigger than his head. His shoulders were 8.5 inches wider than the length of his rump. You think about taking your phone, you want to blow a picture up, and you spread your fingers apart, and everything grows. Testosterone makes the shoulders of the bull grow wider faster than anything else on the bull. Progesterone makes the rump grow wider faster than anything else on the cow. Frank took that massive bull and put him on 100 15-month-old heifers in a 4,600 acre pasture. 60 days later, there were 92 pregnant heifers, but it was a long walk home. If he had just broke that up into 460 acre paddocks and left them in there 6 days at a time, I'll bet there'd have been 98 or 99. He couldn't find them all in 4,600 acres. He was by himself with 100 in 4,000, and he wasn't worried about calving ease. He had it built into both the bull and the females he was breeding.
That is very interesting. I don't know that I've heard that statement before about the width of shoulders. So that's very interesting.
Michael McDonald, God rest his soul, is the one that shared that with me. Another PhD with a lot of common sense.
Oh, yeah. So we talked about slope, talked about shoulders. What else should we look for in a bull?
Well, if you want easy keeping cows, you need large rumens so they digest a greater percentage of what they ingest. Well, you don't necessarily want a bull with the largest belly because he might like watching basketball from the couch rather than practicing basketball. You want a bull whose mother, grandmother, aunts, and sisters all have big bellies. You'll know that you're then breeding easy keeping, low maintenance into the daughters. The bull with the biggest belly, the bull that wins the gain test, is probably not the one you want to buy. Johann Zeitzman wrote a book, Man, Cattle, and VELD, which is grass over there in one of the better books out there. If you want a bull that's going to create grass type, easy keeping daughters, you need a bull who looks like 8 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound sugar sack on all grass.
We've talked a little bit about bulls to improve future generations. Does it make sense if I've got a cow herd and I'm seeing some problems with it? Does it make sense to buy a bull and work for a couple generations in the future? Or would it be better to go buy better cows, sell those cows and get different cows?
Oh, it depends. Fred Provenza wrote a book called Nourishment, and in there he talks about the home field advantage. The junior, the calf, unless you take him to a higher plane of nutrition, is never going to perform as well as what mom was eating while he was in utero and at mom's side. So back to this epigenetic side of things. And I have gotten to places where, well, I got to one place and I told him to sell 3/4 of his animals, and the other quarter, they were marginal, but rarely do I do that. Maybe a quarter of them, and let's get the epigenetics right. You're not expressing the genetics that you have because there's too many of the neighbor's toxins and not enough minerals in utero. So when they come out, they don't even look like they're supposed to look. And then at mom's side and on down the line. But then buying a better bull, you can make a big change. Bringing somebody else's animals in, well, you've got to bring them from a similar environment or they're not going to work. Different horses for different horses. Kind of back to this, a cow at the equator, a cow at Bismarck, North Dakota. A different shape. No. A different package. They're narrower and not as deep in the chest at the equator than they are at Bismarck, North Dakota. They're deeper in the chest and wider in the chest at Bismarck because they got to retain heat. You don't want to be bringing cows that require 50 acres to make a living to a place where it only takes 2 acres to make a living. They'll get too fat to rebreed. That's a whole nother story. Dissimilarly, cows that grew up on 2 acres and you take them where it takes 50, unless you're planning to supplement, they're going to suffer. So you want if you're going to buy cows, you want to buy them from as harsh of an environment as you've got. Probably the best time to buy is if all of those cows are equal. All the calves were weaned at the same time. They all had a calf last year. And they're all pregnant now. About a month before they would normally stop feeding hay, if you went to look then, the ones that are shedding the earliest, the ones that maintain their body condition on the poorest feed. Now, there's a rib slope angle story you'd have to kick in there to kind of really cement that. The ones that have the most vertical folds, the least hair on their udder, that a cow has a U neck. It drops down. RSTUV, a U neck. A bull has a crest. A bull has a bull has an upside down U. A fertile cow has a U. I mean, looking for those things. But rarely do I tell somebody to get rid of all their cows. Usually it's in the 10 to 20%, and then try some of these things, and then you'll find another 10% probably next year that you want to get rid of. But if with that better bull and better epigenetics, you'll start seeing the genetics that you already own, and then the better shape, which it would, if you're 70, you got to go find a bull. You're not going to breed this from inside your herd. And I guess I got to go back, Cal, to finding the bull. The more uniform the cow herd you're buying out of, somebody years of thoughtful breeding, they've been trying to do this versus they've got quite a variety of shapes and sizes of cows. You're not going to have the cookie cutter calf crop out of one of their bulls. But if somebody has the cookie cutter cows, you can buy just about any bull from them and you'll get the cookie cutter calf crop out of your cows.
Steve, I'm interrupting you right there. There's been tons of knowledge dropped, but that I had never even thought about, but that's such a valid point that if it's coming from a uniform herd, those cows are all very similar, and you're going to get some consistency there. If you go to a herd where you got all shapes and sizes, it doesn't have that consistency that's been bred for generations.
And I call it years of thoughtful breeding. There's line breeding, there's inbreeding, there's close breeding. People talk about masculine and feminine. Well, if we had 50 people in the room and you had them write it out, you would probably have 50 slightly different descriptions of what's a masculine bull. There are indicators for fertile females, and there are indicators for fertile males. That's what I want to talk about, because the other is too subjective. It's pretty objective.
Oh, yes.
What is a fertile male? There's a book, Herd Bull Fertility by James Drayson. If you use bulls to get your cows pregnant, I highly recommend owning that book. Herd Bull Fertility, James Drayson.
I was looking over towards my shelf. I don't remember if I have that book or not.
I think it's a yellow.
And if I do have it, I don't recall reading it.
I think it's a yellow book.
You mentioned those fertility indicators. Let's go back over those fertility indicators on the cows and on bulls.
Well, on both, sex hormones shut off long bone growth. Estrogen in the front end of the cow. So the cows, everything else being equal, the cows walking downhill on level ground are producing more estrogen. Bulls who are walking uphill, because testosterone shuts off long bone growth in the back end of the bull, bulls that look like they're walking uphill on level ground are more fertile. If you find a 2-year-old that's walking uphill, buy it. Usually you don't really see it until they're 3 on the bull side. On the cow side, if she's level at 2, she'll be level at 3, and she'll be, the downhill bull calves, heifer calves, they're all kind of walking downhill. But if you find a bull at 2 that's walking uphill, he's going to be a man when he grows up.
Now, walking downhill on heifers, set two, if they're level, they're going to be level throughout their life. So, at what point can you differentiate that downhillness on a heifer?
Oh, heck, at 3 months of age, 6 months of age, 9 months of age. Yeah, you can tell early on. I guess that's what to say about that. And you're going to be thinking, oh, all of these bull calves are walking downhill. Well, yeah, they are. Maybe sometime in their second year of life, they'll start leveling out.
Beyond walking uphill or walking downhill, what else are we looking for?
So a bull's head should be 1/2 as wide as it is long. You're measuring outside the eyes, the pole to the muzzle. And the more of his lower jaw you see, the more masculine he is. On a cow, this is going to sound strange until I finish it. You want a cow's head to be twice as long as it is wide, plus 1 to 2 inches. If it's shorter than 1 inch longer, she's too masculine, not fertile. If it's longer than 2 inches, she's high maintenance. And the less of that lower lip you see, the more fertile she is.
I'm going to have to go look at my mouths of my cows and see what I see.
So then moving to the other end, small diameter tail, male and female. That's going to be butterfat. That's going to be tender meat. Butterfat is easy keeping. You're breeding butterfat into the daughters. You've got cows that have a lot of butterfat that are easier keeping than those that don't have a lot of butterfat. On the males on the back, when the bulls are born, the flatter they are across the top of the shoulder blades and the deeper in the chest, when they're a week old, you can see a difference. On the females, the wider they are across the back end and the deeper the belly, you can see a difference at a week of age or at least by a month. When you put the bulls in, you got 100 cows and you've got 6 or 7 bull calves following the bull who's following the cows around. We got early libido. You want to write those numbers down. But on a bull calf, blocky head, flat across the shoulders and depth of chest, small diameter tail, and then slope from hooks to pins. Slope from hooks, which are level with the backbone, down to pins. Those would be the major indicators early on.
Information there. As I look at the clock, it's about time for us to wrap up and move to our famous 4 questions. But before we do, is there something else you would like to add to this discussion?
That is a good question. Yes, the angle of the last rib. So on a bull, we want as deep and as wide as we can get them up front. The thing that will do that is vertical ribs. It shoves those front legs apart. Those toes on a lot of bulls that point out to the side, they're now pointing straight forward or slightly pigeon-toed. Gives you more width between the top of the shoulder blades, a big ribeye muscle. Well, a bull who has really vertical ribs, because he has wide shoulders, will give you daughters whose ribs angle back, that last rib pointing somewhere between the hock and the ankle. Those girls, those cows tend to take better care of their calf. Cows, or heifers, but cows whose ribs are too vertical, they look good year round, but they bring in a dink calf because they're taking care of themselves instead of their calf. And you won't get that rib angled back in your cows unless you have vertical ribs in the bulls. And I see too many bulls. What you want is that last rib pointing at the prepuce where the bull's penis comes out. I see too many bulls that angle back, pointing at the back toe or something. And you're not fixing the problem of masculine cows.
the ribs are sloped too much on a bull, what does that do to his daughters?
They're too vertical. They're too
vertical.
masculine.
And then, but if you can get a vertical ribs on a bull, then you get the right slope on his daughters.
Bingo. And that right slope, somewhere between the hock and the ankle.
Very good. Well, Steve, this has been an enlightening discussion, but it's time we move to our famous 4 questions. Today's famous 4 questions are sponsored by Manderley Farms Grazing Conference. Attention all farmers, ranchers, and land enthusiasts. Join us for an unforgettable grazing conference on February 21st and 22nd, 2025. At the beautiful Manderley Farms in Pikeville, Tennessee, nestled in the scenic Sequatchie Valley. This is your chance to learn from the best in the business. Our speakers include the renowned Greg Judy alongside the dynamic duo Greg and Debbie Brand. Expect engaging sessions, informative pasture walks, and interactive question and answer sessions with our experts. Discover how to revolutionize your land management with regenerative grazing practices. Whether you're looking to enhance soil health, increase biodiversity, or improve your pasture productivity, this conference is tailored for you. Don't miss this opportunity to grow your knowledge and your farm. For more details and secure your spot, visit www.manderleyfarms.com. That's MANDERLEY. Same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. Our first question, what is your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
There was a book first written in 46 and updated in 1964. Factors Affecting Calf Crop. You can get a PDF of that online. Send me an email, I'll send it to you, and then your listeners can get you to send it to them.
Okay.
But if you already know something about a cow, that's the best book I've ever read. Unless you live in Florida, start reading at chapter 6, or you're going to think I'm crazy. The first 5 chapters are pretty much the deep, deep humid South. But for everything else, that is a really good book.
Excellent. I'm not familiar with that book, so that's a good one.
So another just aside, one time Gerald was going to Australia to judge a livestock show, and he said, I won't be back for 3 weeks. We won't be able to talk. And okay, I mean, at that time, we're talking a couple times a week, I suppose. And about 10 days later, he calls me and he goes, I'm like, well, Gerald, are you back already? He said, no, but I found this book. He said, it's better than Bondsman. I'm like, well, what is it? I get my pencil out and he goes, The Milk Cow in England by E.R. Cochrane. And I'm like, Gerald, I gave you that book 4 or 5 years ago. It's so long to read. You'll have to get it from your England or the continent. There are no copies in the U.S. like Abe Books or Alibus Books or Bookfinder or something. Yes. The freight will be more, but it's the MILCH cow in England. Yes. It was written in 1944 by E.R. Cochrane. It's about dairy, but 80+% of that book is beef as well. It is a very good book also.
Oh, very good. Very good. You know, I ask this question on every episode, and I love it when we get books that I'm not familiar with. These are 2, and you mentioned some others that I'm not familiar with. So wonderful for me because I get to go spend more money and do more reading. My wife will be really excited.
Okay.
Our second question, what's your favorite tool for the farm?
Oh, electric fence. Yeah, electric fence. Hands down, electric fence.
Our third question, what would you tell someone just getting started?
I hate my answer because it's the answer I got, and it's like, well, that doesn't tell me anything, but it does actually all start in the soil. And so if you've got a degraded resource, whether it was farm ground that was planted back to grass or somebody's just left cattle set stocked forever on there, and you've kind of got to bring it back to life. Well, that electric fence will help you. And there's a number of different grazing ideas out there. But until you get that right, you've got to make up for what is not in the soil with a mineral program. And my biggest complaint about mixed minerals is the vast majority, to compete on price, even if they've got a great recipe, to compete on price, they get the individual minerals that originated in China. Almost every mineral coming out of China has cadmium in it. The first thing cadmium does in a cow's body is screws up their ability to regulate internal body temperature. They're too hot in the summer and don't breed. They're too cold in the winter and require more feed. The way you can know if you have that without testing, the way to know if you have that in your herd is if you have a slight hump in the cow's back. From the shoulders, it goes up 2 or 3 inches and then drops back down to the hook bones. Classic cadmium toxicity look.
Oh, yes.
So if you clean, and so anymore, all I'm doing is using sea salt, one of the detox clays, Redmond conditioner, desert dynamine, that sort of thing to get rid of the neighbor. Unless you've got listeners who live where the wind does not blow, there are things from the neighbor blowing in and they negatively affect your cows. So making up for what is not in your soil, and as you improve your grazing and cover crops and interseeding and that sort of thing, the diversity, the biology, pretty quick, the bricks of your grass and the diversity is up, and then you need fewer and fewer and fewer supplements, but get clean supplements.
Get clean supplements. Excellent advice, yes. And lastly, where can others find out more about you?
I have a website, Taylor with an I, tailormadecattle.com. And on there, and I'm hoping to get a copy of this too, I'll put it on. There are 12 or 13 videos. There's a videos tab. There's 12 or 13 videos, and then just some other general information on there. My phone number is 208-315-4726. I want to go back to the website. There's a schedule tab, and I try to update when I'm traveling and where I'm traveling and approximately when I'll be there. And if you're somewhere along the route and you would like a consultation or to put together a field day on your farm or a 2-day school, please call me and we can talk about that. And then my email address is steve@tailormadecattle.com. steve@tailormadecattle.com.
Steve, we appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today.
Well, I'm surprised we didn't use any slides, but thank you for the opportunity. And I just hope that this information will cause some people to look maybe in slightly different areas than they've looked before, and will add to the bottom line, and they and their future generations can stay on the land instead of moving away like we see so much these days.
Oh, yes, I agree. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Grazing Grass Podcast, where we bring you stories and insights into grass-based livestock production. If you're new here, we've got something just for you. Our new listener resource guide is packed with everything you need to get started on your listening journey with the Grazing Grass Podcast. It gives you more information about the podcast, about myself, and next steps. You can grab your free copy at grazinggrass.com/guide. Don't miss out. And hey, do you have a grazing story to share? We're always looking for passionate producers to feature on the show. Whether you're just starting out or have years of experience, your story matters. Head over to grazinggrass.com/guest to learn more and apply to be a guest. We'd love to share your journey with our growing community of grazers. Until next time, keep on grazing grass.